Hello, everyone. Everybody hear me okay? So I'm Justin Segal. There we go. From Boxer Property, among other things. Artificial intelligence is not really a new topic for us. This was a video I did 5 years ago called Artificial Intelligence Now. And it's been great to see how much has changed over time. A little bit about me. Boxer Property is our commercial real estate company, office buildings, hotels, retail properties. We have a flexible space brand called WorkStyle, where we kind of run our own co-working and flex space. We have a software company called Stemmons. We got into the international staffing business with a company called Relay Human Cloud. Diversified a little bit into insurance with Toco. And because I'm in Texas, we had to get into the oil and gas business. So we're in that as well. So we kind of are running a lot of different businesses, but our journey with artificial intelligence started with something very simple, which was I would see the coffee was empty and I would walk over to the nice young woman at reception and ask her to make some coffee. And we decided to use that as our first use case. So I came up with this very high-tech schematic. We took pictures of the coffee every minute. It would kind of send it up to Amazon's image recognition system, pull it back, decide if it needed coffee, and create a task, right? So these are the pictures. You can see they're coming every minute. Back in 2018, we built a little classifier app to teach the system what constitutes needing coffee and what doesn't. And then it would create these tasks and say, hey, it's time for coffee. And I did it this way to demystify and make it not scary and do something kind of cute, but also to learn kind of how it works, right? And so as we think about getting AI into companies, I want to start with this concept of thinking about the scope, right? So let's say someone has an email, comes to them, they're going to use their brain and write a response, and instead they want to use ChatGPT, and it's going to happen faster, right? I think of that as adding value to information or personal enablement. It's letting somebody do a particular job that they're already doing better or faster or whatever. But of course, the data has to come from somewhere, right? There's an email server. And at the end of it, they're taking action, right? So if we think of this as 3 layers of impact, the personal enablement in the middle, and then where's the data coming from, and then what's happening at the end. What we really want is this thing where we can knit these all together, is use our own data, help people do their jobs better, and actually take action, right? And in the end, I'm going to show you a version of that, but it didn't start that way. What we kind of start with is using individual products that add value, that are personal enablement. It could be that you're doing some pictures with Midjourney or managing your prompts or automating your LinkedIn. There's a million of these discrete, specific things that just exist on the personal enablement spectrum, and it's a great place to start. After that, what we started doing and what I recommend is kind of daisy chaining these things, right? How can you link them together, right? So an example is the learning and development team. They would get the inspection results from a property inspection or from a group of them. And the work that they used to do in the instructional design and learning and development was like the Disney animators, right? And eventually they would cough up a video that would go into the LMS and get assigned. So what we did instead is we took that out and we used a series of individual applications. So ChatGPT is analyzing the content, writing the scripts. We're dropping in an avatar. We're doing voiceover. We're adding subtitles. We're adding background images. And so this was one of the early videos that we did about something that we could never, we wouldn't have done manhole covers if we had to do it the old way, but because it was one of a bunch of stuff running through the pipeline, we could do it. Here's kind of some newer videos. This was about elevator entrapment. You can see you kind of, it has a bit of that AI flavor, but when you're generating hundreds of videos, you can do it this way and give people something that is relevant. So this is what we think of as stacking or orchestration. It's not just one thing. It's how do these different systems work together. Another thing we think about is where does this happen, right? So if you're doing something up to ChatGPT, it goes up to the web, to the cloud, it comes back, it hits your eyes, you decide what to do. There are times when we want AI to be happening closer to something, right? Like jamming on the brakes of your car, for example, or your facial recognition when you look at your iPhone, right? So edge-based AI is really interesting. We've been experimenting with that with a company called Technoir that intercepts the camera feeds, and we trained it to teach. I mean, we trained it to identify, like, is somebody stealing a catalytic converter? Are they loitering? Are they skateboarding? Are they too close to the edge of the drop off? That kind of stuff. And this thing intercepts all the camera feeds at the property and immediately alerts based on the AI that has been built into the device that's on the edge, right? So once it's not sending anything to the cloud other than the alerts. So that's us using the edge-based stuff. Of course, any of this stuff has a lot of legal issues that we had to think about. And it has to do with data security, it has to do with copyright issues, it has to do with contracts, and complying with local laws, especially if you're doing anything with HR or if you're in New York or California. There's a lot that we really had to get into beyond just a basic policy that we would put in. And also the ethical issues, which everybody by now is kind of familiar with. This is Isaac Asimov, who came up with the 3 laws of robotics that are highly relevant to some of the stuff that we're seeing these days. Bias in the models is really an issue. This was actually from a presentation about 18 months ago, and I said a bunch of people sitting around a room, and of course it gave a whole bunch of white people. The pendulum kind of swung the other way recently. Many of you probably saw this, that Google had to shut down their system because it was introducing bias in a different direction, right? So this is very visible. You can see that there's bias going on in these pictures, but when you're using a model for something that has to do with math, you may not notice the bias in the same way. So for that reason, we recommend starting with an easier audience. You want to start with your employees, right? They're more forgiving than everybody else who's out there in the wider ocean, right? So when we're looking at different interventions, this is some of the stuff that we think about. Okay, so another option is to have the vendor take care of it. I wish I would have done, I should have used Predict AP for this, because it would have been a great demo, and David is going to be doing this next, but it would be a great example, kind of the same thing. It's like, maybe you want to give the AI portion to a vendor, right? So this is a thing called B2B Rocket. We don't use them. I just kind of did the demo and thought it was interesting. They're kind of scraping databases, coming up with targets. They're researching the targets. They're coming up with a personalized outreach, a personalized video. They handle the drip. And then they have an AI chatbot that talks to your person and hopefully books an appointment. And then you get the appointment. So this kind of thing sounds great, right? You don't even have to learn how to use AI. They have all these dashboards and things where you're dealing with they've kind of made a pipeline out of this. There's their chatbot, which is great, but it's also kind of concerning, right? Here's a third-party company communicating on behalf of my company, handling messaging, handling communications with potential customers, some of whom may actually be my customers. So there's a version of it where it's wonderful because you get to not have to invest yourself in all these things, but there's a whole trust issue associated with it. Maybe less of a trust issue if you're working with somebody like Yardi, who already has all of your accounting stuff. In that case, there's already some inherent trust, and they're rolling out a bunch of things on their Virtuoso platform that are worth looking at. They're kind of chatbots and assistants and so on and so forth. So that's a version where you use the vendor to handle the AI stuff. So I'm going to detour for a second into how LLMs work, because it's kind of relevant for where we're going. The large language model, you put in a prompt, it does some magic stuff in there, and out comes your response, right? So what's actually going on in there, the prompt gets encoded, and then that encoded prompt gets put into a neural network that has a bunch of feed forwarding and doing its thing to find patterns for answers, and then eventually it comes up with the answer and it decodes it into something that you can understand. And these LLMs, It's changing so quickly, but generally speaking, they're expensive to build and to train, right? And that's why you have like, Meta and Google and, these groups that have huge amounts of content and huge compute power available to train them. Now, in fact, it's getting easier, but nonetheless, once it's trained, you can kind of take it and just, it's much smaller, right? And now they're available basically open source. Like you can get many different flavors. It's kind of like shopping in the cereal aisle at a grocery store. And so when we think about how we're going to deploy or use these LLMs, there's some different flavors, right? One is like, hey, it's OpenAI. We're gonna take some data, put it into our prompt. It's going to go hit the Bing, get some information, and give you back a prompt. And we're all kind of familiar with that at this point. The other end of the spectrum is to host it yourself, right? So you take one of these LLMs, put it on your own infrastructure. You have to tune it, right? So training is hard, tuning is easy-ish. There's some great tools available now, and this is kind of getting it ready for your specific use, teaching it some of your language, maybe putting some guardrails around it. And you can connect it to your own data if it's sitting on your own infrastructure. You don't have any of those data issues. And then there's kind of a middle ground, which I'll show you, which is doing it with a partner. And so this example of deal offer prediction, we get all these deals that come in on the real estate front. We abstract them. It used to be into a spreadsheet. Now it's into a data set. So we're sitting on this database that has like all of the deals and our offers that we've made and the kind of historical stuff, which is really useful. And then what happens is when new deals come in, we take that and feed it into a machine learning model, and it gives us a prediction score as to the likelihood of us making an offer on that deal, right? And this is basically using training from the deals that we did in the past to say what's likely to work in the future. And then our guys can look at the stuff that has the highest number, is the most likely to be interesting to us. Okay, and this is what the kind of back end looks like. We had to learn how to bring in a bunch of data from different sources. This is running on Azure stuff through Power BI. Okay, so there's the ML sandbox, and you kind of launch the model. The model goes through this process of training until it announces to you that it's ready. And this stuff is shockingly easy if you have good data. And if you don't have good data, it's still not as hard as it used to be, right? What's happening here is we're kind of going and saying, okay, we're going to work with Power BI, we're going to work with Azure Machine Learning, we're connecting to our accounting data and to our deal data. And then that's giving us the outputs that I just showed you. And it's also going back and updating the data, which is that the number, the single number that says, how interesting the deal is to us, or how likely it is to be interesting. So when you're using something like Azure Machine Learning, it just handles the whole ML flow for you, right? It handles the compute and the model deployment and the training and even the model selection. And you don't need a data scientist in-house. You're partnering now with Microsoft. And there's like a whole menu of things that you can pick from. I mean, it's pretty incredible because this stuff didn't exist like this a while ago. So when we look at this, you may kind of notice something. Let's see. Here we go. Did anybody catch that, right? I was like, oh, you just pull in your accounting data, no problem, right? Right? It's like kind of a magic trick. So I want to just take a second to brag about somebody else's work, which is Yardi has released this thing called YDC. And what normally would happen with Yardi is you would have to go through the application, right? So there's all this stuff that happens and you're looking at it through the Yardi screen. And it's doing its Yardi work in the Yardi application, and you just have to look at the screen that they show you. And the other option is that you could go do some custom work, like hire a consultant and do some SQL stuff and get their APIs or whatever. And that's of course expensive, but then you could see it not in the Yardi screen, but in a dashboard or wherever else you want. And so what YDC does is it kind of pulls the data directly into Power BI, which is really cool. And we had a whole bunch of old Yardi reports that were like really important to us, and we can just drop them into that. It requires a little bit of work to get it straight, but it's how we connect that accounting data, and in particular, not just flat metadata, but calculated information into a machine learning model through the Power BI Azure machine learning pathway, which is like the rainbow bridge to Candyland when you put these three things together. So let's see. So I told you, okay, that what we really want to get to is using our data, going through that kind of value level, and taking action. And this is what we're working on now. I wish I could say it was totally finished, but we're incrementally deploying it, and I'll walk you through the architecture. So it starts with our data, right? And we have some really good normalized data in our organization, which makes things easier. And what we did is we took one of the open sourced LLMs, it's called Mistral, and you can just get it and it's free. And we connected it to our systems. And there's a bunch of little tools that you have to use to do that. But basically it's connected to our own data set. And then what happens is our team has an interface where they can ask questions or interact with the system. It's not a third-party product. It's an interface that is internally available. The data stays within our ecosystem, and they can use that to take actions. And then the next step is to essentially disintermediate the person by having some decision architecture and logic, right? So using something like a workflow engine, like Node-RED is what we use, to say these are things that we want to happen based on the outcomes of the model, right? And then pass that up to APIs to activate things happening in other systems. So this could be creating tasks or changing data or something like that. And what I love about this is that we're really secure as to our data, right? We're not sending it to anyone else. We're not relying on somebody else. It's our stuff. We can really get into the weeds, and we're not breaking confidentiality agreements or whatnot. And then the right-hand side of the screen, the idea that we can get to the action without a person having to do something, right? So this could be like hundreds of tasks created, or thousands or hundreds of thousands of records updated based on what's happening and what's coming out of the model, right? And so where we are now is we have the physical infrastructure. The model is on the physical infrastructure. It's connected to some of our data. It's being beat up by our cybersecurity team. Not surprisingly, they're very concerned about this, and they're going through their full change management process around it. And the first thing that we're pointing it towards is SOPs and documents. And then the next thing is going to be the task management system, which is, I think, where there's a lot of really fun activity. So, what can we use that for? It's like, hey, we want to ask any question about the company, right? And because it can get to all of our data, that's awesome. We can summarize things. For example, this is a little summary function that we built that summarizes whatever the thing is that we're on when we ask for a summary. We can predict things like the likelihood of somebody defaulting or the likelihood of somebody renewing, and then we use that number to focus on things. We can change data. That's just a little workflow of kind of updating different fields based on other fields. We can actually create and assign tasks, right? This is the API thing where you go, okay, now I want you to actually do something. And we can do things like say, hey, what should we do next? Like we can kind of pre-prompt and drop those pre-written prompts in a context-sensitive place, right? So for example, if you're on this customer record, you might say, who would be a good reference? Show me other customers like this who have a spend. Or what should I say next to this email? Or that kind of stuff. So these kinds of prompts that can be context-sensitive are a really interesting use case for us. So if you're looking at doing this kind of stuff, I wouldn't imagine this thing where you make a huge investment and take a lot of time and then leapfrog up to to the kind of stuff that I was just showing you is, it needs to kind of happen in stages, right? Incrementally. So, do some personal enablement, kind of embrace that, do some stacking, see how things flow together, maybe find some good vendors to work with, do the trusted partner thing where you're working with like Microsoft or AWS or something. And then it's time to kind of do something that really is yours, which I think at the end of the day will be where companies can really distinguish themselves. And it'll be like, do you have your own internal system that can look at any of your data and can originate activities within your organization in a global way? And that's, I think, the big payoff for this kind of stuff. There's so many use cases, but that's where I think we want to get to. So there are some trade-offs here, right? We want enterprise enablement. We want the data under our control. And we want it to be affordable, and we want it soon, right? So this is kind of that classic pick two type of situation. And I want to suggest, mostly because it's my company, that there's an option here, which is to reduce your costs by using international talent. Okay, and this is the only way we were able to afford to do these things. Is we ended up opening positions in India and Mexico and Honduras. We spun that off into a separate company called Relay. Relay supports a lot of real estate companies, many of which some of which are in the room. And if you don't have a huge budget set aside for this kind of stuff, then the next time you're going to hire an accountant or a data person or something like that, this is where we got the money to do it. This is where we made the room in our budget. We save about $18 million a year on international staffing. We reinvest that into things like data scientists and the kinds of experiments and stuff that I was showing you here today. So blatant plug for Relay here. But anyway, here's some examples of people that we have in that system, including Power BI people and YDC stuff. So I've got a lot of content that I didn't share kind of in this. There's a bunch of checklists and roadmap type things that I love to share. My email address is on there. If anybody is interested in any of that content, please let me know. And a day or two after the conference, I'll go back and kind of field the emails. But you're welcome to that. And also, if you want a copy of this presentation, I'm happy to share that as well. So that's all I have for you today. Thank you guys for being here, and I look forward to connecting with you at the conference and answering any questions offline. Thank you.